Good evening, everyone. We are back in our study in the book of Deuteronomy, and we left off yesterday at verse 18. Now, over the course, there was a question about the name of God here. And this word is not El, but it is spelled this way. Now, this is one particular way, but I think according to some of the authorities, it is better to be pronounced as Eloah rather than Eloha. And so I just want to mention that as a point in correction. So let's look at verse 19. Remember, this is the last sayings of Moses. It is Moses' insight about God. It is Moses' knowledge and experience about God. And he is actually putting it into a song. In fact, this whole chapter is about a song that is given to the Israelites to remember God by, as a lesson that Moses had throughout his life with regards to knowing Jehovah God. And it is somewhat prophetic because it speaks about a future time in the event that they depart from God. And hence, the focus in chapter 32 is about how God relates to his people and what his people eventually crossing the Jordan, enjoying the fruits of the blessings that God has given them, gets filled and fattened, and they pursue after other gods. And that is the focus of this chapter again. And you've noticed that this theme of idolatry is a trigger point for God's anger. And so at this point in time, when we continue in verse 19, you do remember that these are words that is prophetic about them forgetting, not keeping God in mind when things go well for them. And they forget that God is their father. And as I mentioned yesterday, the Hebrew concept of father is one who is the protector and provider of the family. And in this imagery that God is presented in a metaphor of a father and Israel as the son, and you would find that it really gives us an imagery of a very intimate relationship. But we need to remember that this is not a modern day father and son. This is actually a Hebrew concept of a father and son. And a father provides, and the son is expected to obey and listen to what the father says. And here God says, Moses is saying that no, they would forget about the God who belabored, who gave birth to them, basically. Continuing on in verse 19, the Lord saw it. And remember, in Hebrew, it is very visual, very physical, very concrete. And then literally God actually saw what they did. And when God saw what they did, look at what God responded. And the idea of this is to despise them. The idea here is there is a word here, and then many of the times this is not translated, but I just want you to see it here that God saw and then he spurned. God does not spurn them for whatever reason that he himself do. God responds to his children. And that is what we are talking about. And why did God do it? Because of the provocation of his sons and his daughters. And so the children of Israel are called his people. And now the metaphor of father and son is in play. And so really, it is so that we today can see that God is not one who will leave them nor forsake them. And we've seen that before. But when they go after other gods, it provokes God to anger. And in so doing, God will forsake them. And you've seen that God is a conditional God in that sense. But by himself, God will not give up on them until they give up on God. And you can see, and God says, I will conceal my face from them. I will see what their end will be, for they are a perverse generation, children in whom there is no faith. And so when it says God will hide my face from them, it will be concealing. And so they can't turn and look for God, basically, can't find. And my face from them is a very personal thing. It's like, when you have young children, and when you're angry with your children, and your children is always trying to look for approval from you, and you turn your face away, and that is what it means here. God turns his face away because he is not going to show approval. And I will see what their end may be. Now, the word end is the end times, the latter time, the latter period. God is waiting to let this play out, basically. And for they are a perverse generation. Now, understand the word perverse. They are, how should we say? They are fraud, right? Or they are playing, how should you say, perverse? Maybe we should say that they are actually pretentious, right? Pretentious. What this means is they play their part, but they are actually not obeying God, but they pretend to be. And so it says these are children, and the word is sons, in whom there is no faith. And the word faith here is emun, right? Emun. And this is better understood as faithfulness. They may start faithful, but they are not faithful to the end. They are faithful when they cross the Jordan, when they enjoy good things. And when things get good and they get fattened up, they begin to look for other gods. And so they are not trustworthy. And that's how God sees them. The provocation is very much about the new gods, right? New gods that they never knew, or their fathers never knew. And so this is the same theme on idolatry. And God is very worked up with idolatry. I think we should get that picture by now. And so in verse 21, it tells us that they have provoked me to jealousy. Now, the idea to provoke to jealousy means to provoke, to stir anger, right? To stir anger. Now, don't just look at the English word jealousy. The word jealousy, kana, right? That I'm a kana god, literally has two flavors. The positive side would be like a bird, or who is protecting the little birds in the nest. God is a kana God. God will protect and take care, and that means jealously or zealously in protection of his loved ones. And that would be Exodus chapter 20, that God is a kana God, a jealous God. But in this case, when it says they have provoked me to jealousy, it is the negative aspect. And the negative aspect is very much a zealous anger. And they do that by doing what is not God. And so in verse 21, what is not El. And this would mean idols. This is not God himself, it is idols. So they have moved me to anger by their foolish idols. Well, this whole idea, you can see, provoked to jealousy, moved to anger, are part and parcel of the same concept, right? It's the same concept. And this one here is this word foolish idols would really be the word hevel, right? Hevel, which is vapor. And it means that these are the gods that will vanish away. It has no meaning over time, right? And that's what foolish means. Now, the word idol is provided by the translator because it is talking about what is not God. And so we have an A and a B here. Now, the response by God is, I will provoke them to jealousy. Same thing. God says, if you make me angry, I will make you angry too. By those who is not a nation. This would be not a nation, those who are not of Israel. I will move them to anger by a foolish nation. And this word nation is also provided. And so just like this word idol is provided by the translator, by someone who is senseless. And so the idea here is, you make me angry, I will make you angry too. And the idea of making them angry is so that they realize they are actually hopeless by themselves. Verse 22, a fire is kindled in my anger and shall burn to the lowest hell. Now the word lowest hell is in the lower parts. The lowest parts of Sheol. I don't think it means hell. It means the afterworld. And that is what Sheol actually means. So hell is really not a very nice word to use. And it shall consume the earth with her increase, set on fire the foundations of the mountains. Understand this, the foundations of the mountains is under the ground, the land. Consume the earth is to burn up. It's like fire consuming. God is a consuming fire. And so a fire is kindled, consume the earth. Burn to the lowest Sheol, will be set on fire under the land, way under, right? Way under. And so you find another A and a B here. It's talking about the anger of God that is going to be so great. It'll be so great. Verse 23, I will heap disasters on them. Understand this, disasters is Ra, evil. And so remember what I always said about evil. Evil is in the eyes of the beholder. And so if it's evil in the eyes of them, Israel, it means that these are things that they don't like. And it's translated as disasters because it is not a moral thing. God will bring upon them calamities, right? Calamities. Then he says, I will spend my arrows on them. Again, arrows is paired with disasters. Arrows would be attacks on them. And so again, we have an A and a B. that God will. You see here? I will. It is saying that God will do something that will punish them. So we have actually spent a lot of time in the book of Micah, Amos, Habakkuk, and Jeremiah, Isaiah. And every one of them speaks about the fact that when they went against God and into Hamas, into violence, into injustice, and then into idolatry, God will bring the disaster upon them. And this is the song. It's right in Deuteronomy, way up front, that they will be wasted with hunger, devoured by pestilence and bitter destruction, and I will send against them teeth of beasts and the poisons of the serpents of the dust. And so you find that there'll be natural disasters, right? Natural disasters. All of these describes that. Verse 25, the sword shall destroy outside from them. There'll be terror inside them for the young man and the virgin. Now understand this, the young man and the virgin, these are the unmarried. The nursing child, the little child, the infant. With the man of gray hair, the elderly. These are all the innocents, right? The innocents. And there will be terror. The idea here is that you find that from the outside, the sword refers to enemies. God will send the enemies, and we have read how God used the Assyrians and later on the Babylonians to do this work. So this is really, really prophetic. And then I would have said, I will dash them in pieces. I will make the memory of them cease from among men. And this is describing how angry God can be for their revolt against God. What does that mean? God, when he gets angry, he gets very angry with idolatry. And I think you can remember in Exodus chapter 32, I believe, when they made the golden calf. And when you go back and read this chapter, you will see how angry God was. And God was saying to Moses, look, I will destroy all of Israel and I will start again with you, Moses. That is how angry God is, to make the memory of them cease from among men. These words, if you remember, is actually told to Joshua and the Israelites when they cross the Jordan. They will make the names of all these nations cease. So the Canaanites are forgotten, the Philistines are forgotten, the Jebusites are forgotten, the Hittites are forgotten. All these nations, their names will be forgotten. But when it comes to Israel, many people will think, oh, God will not forget about Israel. God is a just God. Just as the other nations went against God, God will also tell Israel, if you continue to worship other gods, how can I be in the midst of you? And so the anger of God is the consequence of idolatry. We see in verse 27, it says, had I not feared the wrath of the enemy. This would be the enemy of Israel. Now, look at this. In verse 27, it says, had I not feared the wrath of the enemy, it would be the enemy of Israel. And the idea of afraid here is that that God is to dread, is to dislike, right? To dislike the provocation. The enemies of Israel provokes God in the following ways, right? The following verses describes such provocation. So I would want to hold back and just to express this, that God is detesting, God really dread the provocation of the enemy, because the enemy, when they win over Israel, they will think that God does not exist. Now, that is the kind of provocation that God doesn't like. And so he says in verse 27, lest their adversary should misunderstand. What do you mean by misunderstand? It would be that they would not recognize or would not acknowledge God. You see, when they entered into Canaan, when they crossed the Jordan, they had a victory over Jericho, which is Jericho. And then after that, they decided that they would go on their own merry way to attack Ai. And they failed. And people would think that, wow, Israel is not that strong after all. This is what the misunderstanding is, that the powers and the strength of Israel is actually with God. Although physically they see Israel, God, when he says he will give the enemies to them, God somehow gives them this innate supernatural ability to win, to have victory over their enemies who are greater, bigger, stronger, smarter than them. And now if they lose to their enemies, their adversaries would think that, hey, Israel is no use now. Lest they should say, our hand is high, I have the ability. And it is not the Lord who has done this, that God doesn't exist in all this. And God is now saying that they are a nation void of counsel. Nobody is advising them that is foolish. They have no understanding in them. Oh, that were they wise and they had understood this, they would consider their latter end. The latter end would be the end of times, or end of their times. So basically, what the song is saying is that when God says they are not advised properly, when they appear to win over Israel, they think that it's their ability. And so the song says, if they had considered their latter end, that Jehovah God is real, true, and living, they wouldn't have done this. That is what the phrase means. Verse 30, it says, how could one chase 1,000? One of the enemy chase 1,000 Israelites. Or two, put 10,000 to flight. And so that's what they were thinking. How can the enemies do this? This is an impossible thing about Israel. And they should have thought, unless their rock had sold them and the Lord had surrendered them. This is A and B, and this is another A and B, right? This is an impossible victory. Unless their rock is the Lord and God is no longer with them. So you can see how the Hebrew expresses these words. Their rock is not like our rock, even our enemies themselves being judges. What does this mean is that all through the history of Israel, in the conquest of the land, the nations around them knows that they have wisdom and they have intelligence because they have a God who is living. And so this is what they say, their rock or their gods is not like our rock. Our would be Moses speaking as well. And this is firm and unchanging, faithful. And even our enemies can see for themselves. And so when Moses have said that, no, see, we have gone in and conquered people who are greater, bigger, smarter, taller, more fortified cities, more experienced in warfare, and yet they win because God is with them. And that's why the nations around them tremble when they hear Israel coming. For their vine is the vine of Sodom and the fields of Gomorrah. Their grapes are full of bitterness as gall. Their clusters are bitter. Their wine is the poison of serpents, the cruel venom of cobras. And these are in pairs, as you can see. Sodom and Gomorrah, destruction. Right? Bitterness, death. So all of this is about death and destruction. And that is what is in store for our enemies, right? Their vine, they. So what are they doing? They are the ones who will inflict upon Israel all these things. And God is, and this is a song that it's like a warning to Israel. And then in verse 34, it says, is this not laid up in store with me, sealed among my treasures? This, what is this? This is what comes after, right? The following verses. And the idea of store is that it is saved up, sealed among my treasures. And the idea of treasures here is storehouse, right? Storehouse or treasury. And so this idea of laid up and sealed up gives you the picture. Laid up in store, sealed up, literally means it's kept safe, right? God has kept safe and away the following verses, which means that when all these judgments come, when the enemies come after Israel, God actually stepped aside, and remember it, God concealed his face because the fact that they went after other gods. But what is this that God has kept, which is the goodness of God? Verse 35, he says, vengeance is mine. Vengeance, and the idea of vengeance is to avenge. God will avenge for his people when the time is right. And just like Samson, when it came to the last part of his life, God acted. And God says, I will recompense. And you must understand, this word is Shalem. Shalem is another word to pay back, restitute. And you will find that when it's completely paid back, there is shalom, peace. And so shalem is a verb. Shalom is the noun. And so shalem says, God says, I will avenge. I will pay you back for what you did to my people. That is what this means. Their foot shall slip in time, right? At the right time, for the day of the calamity is at hand, and the things to come hasten upon them. All these three, A, B, and C, speaks about an impending avenge. by God. See, only God can take the vengeance for Israel, because Israel, at this time in this prophecy of the song, would have gone after other gods, and God will let all these people do all these calamity against Israel. For the Lord will judge his people and have compassion on his servants. When he sees that their power is gone, there is no one remaining bond or free. Now let's break this down a little bit. Jehovah is the judge. And when you say judge, in this case, it will be one who will plead for his people and have compassion. Now, have compassion comes from the word nacham. You'll be interested to know. This comes from the word nacham. And this particular word means to, well, I guess you could say, I won't say repent. I think it would be relent. Okay? And so these two is an A and a B, that his people are also called his servants. And we'll read more about his servants, even in the singular in the book of Isaiah. But God is now looking at the relationship between God and Israel. When the right time comes, God will step in, right? God will act. When the time comes, when he sees their power is gone. Now, what do you mean their power is gone? In end of verse 6, it really sees that, how should we say? Their hand has gone away. And so and the word power here is hand. It means that they have no more strength to lift their hand to do anything, right? They are in humility. And there is no one remaining, and it talks about the finality. This phrase here is really saying that that there will be there will be the end of restraint and forsaken. Okay, this would be the phrase instead of this. So I guess that verse 36 in the last part, I'm not sure where this phrase comes in, but it's not in the Hebrew. And I don't see it in the Greek as well. Maybe it's somewhere else. Maybe it's in the Latin. But now we will stick with the Hebrew. And so basically what it says here in these two lines, we have an A and a B as well. It is about the time of the end of their wits. That's what it means. That they have felt that they have come to the end and they have been totally forsaken by God. Okay. Verse 37 is a question that God asks. Remember, this has started with the warning of not to ignore God, not to forget God, not to forget the Father who has travailed for them, brought them out of Egypt. And so now finally, when everything is at an end and they are at the wit's end, they can't even lift their hand, has no more power, God will say, Where are their gods? And notice the word there here is Israel. You want to have foreign gods? So where are your Elohims? Because you treat God as nobody, the rock in which they sought refuge. And so understand this. God is seen as a rock. And we have seen that in the earlier verses. And God is always equated to the rock because God is a trustworthy, faithful God. Like the rock in Israel, doesn't move. And that is where God is asking them, where is your rock? If you think that you have your idols, where are they? Now that you are in this poor and pitiful state, where is this God who ate the fat of your sacrifices, where they burn sacrifice, including the fat? Where is the one who drank the wine of their drink offering when they offer wine to their gods? Let them stand up. Let them help you. Let them be your refuge. 38. Refuge means a hiding place. Now, these are times when enemies have come and brought destruction, death, right? And, well, I guess you say calamities. And so God asks them, because this is, well, I guess you can say a way of mocking. Now, verse 39, now you see, and again, I need to emphasize, the Hebrew is about looking at things. Now, at that time, you can see, and this is the emphasis that even I, am He. Who is He? Elohim, the rock. That is what God is saying, right? And when you see that you are at wit's end, the gods that you follow after the other nations cannot help you, then you know that there is no God besides me. And so this idea here is there is no Elohim. And the word besides me is, well, I guess you could say besides me, or along with me. Basically, it's saying God is the only God, the only true God, in fact, if you want to say that. And then he says, he has this power in verse 39 that he will cause to die. That is not the word kill, right? He will cause one to die, and he will cause one to live. What does that mean? It means that life and death is with God. If he wants to kill you, he can. Right? That is what it means. And so the idea of kill here is to cause to die, and that is a contrast to live, wound, and heal. The word heal is restore. These are the opposites, right? The A and the A prime. The A and the A prime. So to cause to die, cause to live. Wounded, restored. And then he says, is there anyone who can deliver from my hand? The idea of delivering is to cause to snatch away from God's hand. So the word deliver means this, cause to snatch away. You would see that God is giving this picture through the song of Moses, that the hand of God is so powerful that no one can take anything out of his hand. He has the power to cause one to die, right here, as we have seen. He has power to give life. He has the power to wound. And the word wound here, I forgot to mention to you. The word wound here is to shatter or to break. And then the idea of heal here is to restore, to make back into wholesomeness, right? These are all opposites. And there is no one who can snatch anything from God's hands. And in verse 40, God says, I raise my hand to heaven. This is a signature of an oath. God is swearing an oath. And when God swears an oath, he says, as I live forever. This is the Hebrew oath. Now, for common man, they would say, as Jehovah lives. But here is talking about Jehovah himself. And so he swears on himself, basically, that as I live. And this word forever is olam. As I live for a long, long time, and it would go on because he is Ehyeh, Asher, Ehyeh. And that's what he said to Moses. I am the ever-living one, and I will live on and on. And so I can swear, I can make an oath in my name because I will deliver. Because God will deliver, will make good on his oath. And this would be the oath made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Verse 41, if I whet my glittering sword, the word whet is sharpen, and my hand takes hold of judgment. Takes hold would be seize. Seize. Now, in this case, judgment will be justice. And this is in preparation of judgment. Now, in the ancient days, judgment is all by swords, right? All by swords. It's by execution. And so God says, I will render vengeance to my enemies, and this would be the enemies of Israel, and repay those who hate me. The word repay is, in this case, it is shalem. And it is payback, right? Payback. Those who hate me. Now, the idea here, hate, is sane, who turn away from me. So those who turn away from God is actually called his enemies. Render vengeance is to repay. And so here we have an A and a B. And I will make my arrows drunk with blood, and my sword devour flesh with the blood of the slain and the captives. And these will be the enemies. This is basically tell them that God is able to deliver them. And so these are the judgments: drunk with blood, devour flesh, arrows and sword. And this is an A and a B. Basically, this is judgment. Now we come towards the end of this chapter. It says here, cry for joy. Rejoice, O Gentiles. This word Gentiles is Goyim. The non-Jews or the non-Israel, with his people, his Amo, right? That he will avenge the blood of his servants, render vengeance to his adversaries, will provide atonement for his land, his people. I think the idea of this word rejoice and with Goyim basically is to let them know that the God of Israel is real, that God will avenge the servants after all the enemies have inflicted. And so God comes out and he will take vengeance on his adversaries. His adversaries will be the adversaries of the people. He will provide covering. Atonement is a good word for his land and his people. Now understand this. This is a very important concept. Atonement is always with reference to uncleanness. And his land and his people has been unclean because they have gone for idols. And his land has been stepped on with the blood of enemies. And so God has to cleanse his land and his people. All right. Now we come to the final segment. And very quickly, let us just wrap this up. Moses came with Joshua. Remember, Yehoshua is now the next in line that will take over from Moses, and you would see them always in pair. In the previous days, it would have always been Moses and Aaron, and Aaron died on Mount Hor. And now Moses is with Joshua, the son of Nun, and he spoke all the words, all the davar. Davar are issues. And what are the issues? Idolatry. And it is in a song, in the hearing of the people. Why do you think it's in a song? So that they can sing it and they are always reminded. When Moses completed saying all these words to all Israel, all 12 tribes, then he reminded them, says, set your heart. The word set here is to put. Put your hearts on all the words which I testify among you today. The word testify is to warn. And so, as I had mentioned to you, these are warnings of the future, right? The future Israel, which you shall command your children to be careful to observe all the words of this Torah. So do not be alarmed with the word Torah. This is to keep and do all, not some, all of God's words. For it is not a futile thing for you. Verse 47, the word futile is empty or vain. This is not worthless. This is very worth it because it is your life, and by this word, you will extend your days in the land when you cross over to the Jordan to possess, which means that this word will make long your days. So they will stay in the land for as long as they are until they depart from the word of God. It is life, basically. And now we come to the final segment. It's about the end of Moses. And the Lord spoke to Moses that very same day, is when he finished giving them the song and the words and reminding them of the Torah. Then he says, go up this mountain of Avarim. It's called Mount Nebo. Mount Nebo. Mount Nebo. Right? Mount Nebo. which is in the land of Moab, across from Jericho. Jericho, right? Across from Jericho, in view of the land of Canaan, which I will give to the children of Israel as a possession. And you will die on the mountain. Your end will be on the same mountain which you climb up, and you'll be gathered to your people, just as Aaron, your brother, died on Mount Hor and was gathered to his people. This phrase, gathered to your people and gathered to his people, is a very euphemism of saying they will die, right? Basically, they will die. They are coming to an end, and the concept is they will join the previous generations of people. And the reason why you are not going any further, in verse 51, it's another reminder, because you have trespassed against me. The word trespass literally means ma'al. It means to be unfaithful. Right? Unfaithful. You committed a trespass. You thought that you were doing right by God, but actually you have done wrong. And that would be a situation. It would be a situation in Numbers chapter 20. This would be in Numbers chapter 20. When God told him to speak to the rock, he struck the rock for the waters of Meribah, Kadesh, in the wilderness of Sin, because you did not hallow me. The idea of hallow me means make holy or make God special. And by speaking to the rock, that would be very different. First, he struck the rock in chapter 17 of Exodus. And then in Numbers chapter 20, he struck the rock twice instead of speaking to the rock. Because by speaking to the rock, it would make God very different in the midst of the children of Israel. Yet you shall see the land in front of you, but you shall not go there into the land which I am giving to the children of Israel. So you can see, but you cannot go. You see, the Hebrew expression is very concrete. And he went to see, and we'll see that in the next chapters. But he cannot go in there. And the idea is to go in, right? Go in, cross Jordan. And God says, no, you can't. And with this, we come to the end of the song and also the final segment of what is going to happen to Moses from here on. And with this, we end chapter 32.